Hey everyone, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology bringing you another chart reading. And today I wanted to look at the chart of Matt Damon. He's an actor, and if you want to follow along, his birthday is October 8th, 1970. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and we do have a birth time of 3:22 p.m. Now, the reason I wanted to look at his chart was because he had gotten into a little bit of hot water earlier in December. He made a comment or a few comments when he was doing an interview for his latest movie release. And this was actually on December 12th when the interview occurred. And I have a quote of what he said, one of the things he said, I should say. He said he was talking about sexual harassment in Hollywood and politics, and he said, specifically regarding Al Franken and Harvey Weinstein, he said, both of those behaviors need to be confronted and eradicated without question, but they shouldn't be conflated. And for him, he was talking about how he felt that there's a spectrum of behavior on the issue of sexual assault, and that each instance should be handled individually, and that we shouldn't be grouping everybody together into one category necessarily. Now, I'm reading from a Boston Globe op-ed that somebody wrote, a woman named Joan Venoci. And she has a few interesting points. I mean, she basically said, because what happened was immediately some women gave him some feedback, that wasn't very supportive. And what this woman is saying in the op-ed is that basically, it's not fair to be like shutting men down if we want to have a conversation around this. And the way she describes it is, she says, isn't it better to hear what men have to say than to tell them to just shut up, as Damon was angrily urged to do? His comments were dismissed as egomaniacal, quote, mansplaining from a privileged member of the patriarchy. And then at the end of her article, basically she sums it up by saying that if the full range of offensive male behavior is going to be eradicated, as Damon also advocated, it needs to be confronted and discussed rationally. To do that, men need to be heard too. And then she goes on to say, yet urging caution or restraint in the age of the hashtag #MeToo puts a person at risk of being Twitter shamed as a generationally out of touch enabler. The anger of Weinstein's victim is understandable. So is the anger of any woman who has a hashtag #MeToo moment to share. And by now we know that adds up to a lot of angry women. But turning that anger against anyone who questions the rush to condemn every man for every touch, that sets up a modern day bonfire of the vanities. It won't change the world. It just gives Damon another movie idea to pitch. So I shared all of that with you because I wanted to put into context what happened. And now I want to look at his chart and look at perhaps why he was talking about it from this perspective in the first place. And I find it interesting. He has a sun at 15 degrees Libra, and his sun is conjunct Uranus at 9 degrees Libra. So when you think about a Libra sun, you've got somebody who is into fairness and is into trying to seek harmony and balance. But with Uranus next to it, that's going to bring in this element of somebody who has revolutionary ideas, somebody who is a trailblazer, somebody who is kind of like that Uranian coyote trickster energy where they will set people off, because they're coming from a different angle. They're coming from just a not as well thought of angle. People, a lot of times Uranus deals with with what you might call divine knowledge. It's like an insight type of energy, and that blends with his identity. So he just comes across and does have, you know, these kind of different perspectives when it comes to his expression through his identity. And what's also interesting is that Mercury is there too. Mercury is at 1 degree Libra. So Mercury is not conjunct his Sun, but it is conjunct his Uranus. So this is his communication. This is his way of thinking. And that sits next to Uranus as well. So that's going to bring in even more of a revolutionary thought process to who he is. What's also interesting is that Pluto is also next to his Mercury, and that's at 27 degrees Virgo. So the Mercury's at 1 degree Libra, the Pluto's at 27 degrees Virgo. So it's an out of sign, but 4 degree conjunction. And that's going to bring another element to his communication style, because Pluto is about taboo subjects, you know, things that society likes to kind of like push down and suppress and keep in the unconscious. So when you've got Pluto conjunct your communication energy, that means that perhaps sometimes the things that you talk about are going to be the taboo subjects that society doesn't necessarily want to look at. And I think that is the case here in how he responded to this issue of sexual harassment. You know, he kind of brought up that part of like, hey, you know, maybe it's not fair, Libra, to lump everybody into the same category, and that it's important not to kind of get on this almost like mob mentality kind of thought process in how we handle or approach this issue, that we need to make sure we're looking at it fairly. The last piece here is that his Mars at 22 degrees Virgo conjuncts his Pluto at 27 degrees Virgo, and it does widely conjunct that Mercury at 1 degree Libra. There's a little stellium there, a concentration of energy. You know, and Mars is going to bring like the warrior spirit to that part of him. So it's almost like he's not necessarily going to be afraid to say things, and he'll also kind of be able to go through these, in some ways, kind of transformative processes as he's communicating, you know, about certain things. He's willing to kind of like go into the fire, you know, he's willing to take on that I guess that collective energy. It can also indicate that he might go through changes in the way he thinks, because Pluto is about transformation. So perhaps, you know, that's a part of his experience too. But really it's about kind of an investigative mind, somebody who can really look deeply into things and uncover things and has a lot of energy to do that. Now, also just taking Mars and Pluto, I kind of had a thought about him. You know, Mars it rules Aries, which is connected to the first house in the zodiac. And the first house deals with our appearance, our physicality. So to have Mars in Virgo, the sign of health, next to Pluto, the sign of transformation, I find it interesting because he certainly takes on a physical change in certain roles that he's had. And I read something that he lost 40 pounds for a role through a self-imposed diet and exercise. So that's what that Mars conjunct Pluto in Virgo gives to him, is that ability to really transform his physical body. So to me, just a little interesting piece of trivia that connects to his chart. All right, moving on to other parts of his chart. He does have a grand, like 3 grand trines, and they're all connected to that stellium, that Mercury, Pluto, Mars stellium. They trine his moon at 22 degrees Capricorn. So let's just think about what that means, to have your moon trined Mercury, your moon trine Mars, and your moon trine Pluto. That that would mean that, well, just Moon in Capricorn, that's somebody who responds emotionally. Their subconscious predisposition is very grounded, very practical, you know. It can mean sometimes that they might feel a little bit inhibited, that they might feel a little like self-conscious around expressing their emotions and feelings. But in this trine energy to those three planets, those planets support his lunar expression, and you know, they help him express his emotions and his feelings. But again, they're still going to be very practical, you know. That's Capricorn. And then the other piece to this grand trine is that those three planets and the Moon now at 22 Capricorn trine his Saturn at 21 degrees Taurus. So it's a grand trine in Earth, and to have Moon trine Saturn, let's just take that piece of it. Again, that brings a lot of groundedness and practicality and stability to the emotional self. And then again, Saturn trining that Mars, Mercury, Pluto stellium means that there's an element of his work that's tied into that very passionate, deep, communicative side of himself that wants to deeply look into things. There's a part of his work is tied into that, because that's that Saturn. Saturn deals with our work, how we create structure and foundation in our lives, often in the material world. So that energy, the Saturn trining those three planets, brings that energy into his work, but also again just brings groundedness into the expression of his passionate communication around, you know, looking deeply into things. You know, and I find it interesting. Let me just go back to his Sun and Uranus conjunct it's actually in his 8th house, his Sun. And that's interesting to me. I guess that can just mean, because a lot of times people with 8th house suns, they're not very like out in the world kind of people, because the 8th house is the Scorpio house ruled by Pluto. So it's the solar energy, the identity wants to focus itself in 8th house areas of research and the occult and, you know, psychology, you know. So it's just interesting that he has that Sun in the 8th, but that could also just mean that he's good at transforming. He's good at taking on new roles, you know, because he can really go deeply into those roles and then eventually, you know, kind of let it all go and then take on, you know, something different for himself. So that's perhaps one way that Sun in the 8th house plays itself out. Now, the Sun and Uranus that are conjunct, and then the Mercury-Uranus is conjunct, and then the Mercury-Pluto is conjunct. Those 4 planets all oppose Chiron in his chart. He's got Chiron in Aries in the 2nd house. Now, Chiron opposite Uranus and Pluto are more generational aspects, because Chiron moves so slowly, it will be in opposition to Uranus and Pluto for lengths of time. But to have the Sun and Mercury there as well is less common. And let me first just talk about Chiron and Aries. Chiron and Aries, again, is a generational energy, but then when it's bringing in the Sun and the Mercury in his chart, it's definitely more personal. And Chiron and Aries has to do with a wound. The wounded healer is Chiron, around self-worth, around asserting the self. Because again, Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It's about kind of bringing our energy out into the world. But if you have a wound in that area, that can inhibit you, that can hinder you from feeling comfortable doing that. And so then when it's connected to the Sun, which is about shining and about our identity, with Chiron opposing it, there's this kind of push and pull between wanting to express your solar energy and being confident, because that's what the Sun is about, is our self-confidence, and then not feeling like we are confident with that wound in Chiron. with that wound in Aries. Now, this can indicate some sort of issue with the father, because the sun can represent our father in our chart. And I know about him that his father actually, and this is a sun in the 8th house also point. Sometimes people with sun in the 8th, they lose their father, or their father's not around growing up. And I know that his parents got divorced when he was like 2 or 2.5. And I don't know much about his father. I couldn't really find out a lot of information as far as who he was in his life, because Matt went to live with the mother, as I understand, in kind of like a communal living situation. And I believe she raised him. So at a young age, his father was definitely separated from him in the living environment. I don't know how much he was involved in his life on a daily basis. And so this can be something that sun in the 8th houses experience, as well as people with sun opposite Chiron. And what happens is that because we don't have that sun, that father there saying, you know, giving us the strength and the guidance and like the support and the encouragement, we can, especially with the sun opposite Chiron, that can be a part of our wounding experience. Mercury opposite Chiron, again, can bring in this not feeling confident in our communicative expression, because we, you know, that wound brings us down and makes us feel like we don't know enough perhaps, or we can't trust our thoughts, we can't trust our thinking. And then to have the Chiron opposite Uranus, again, a generational energy. Basically, Uranus, again, brings that insight, brings that higher understanding. So sometimes through the wounding experience, we learn more about, like, kind of why that was necessary. We have a larger understanding, ultimately, of life being a series of experiences that bring us growth and change, and you know, that's what Uranus helps us to kind of understand, especially around the wound, is that we can ultimately kind of heal from those wounding experiences, and we can gain insight through those wounding experiences into how to kind of do it differently, you know, how to feel more confident ultimately with the wound being in Aries. And also Chiron opposite Pluto, that relates to, similar to Uranus in the sense that, you know, there's a lot of transformation and growth related to essentially learning from our wounded self. What brings him to acting? Well, in his chart, he's got Neptune at 29 degrees right on his midheaven, which is at 28 degrees of Scorpio. So this means, you know, whenever you have a planet in the 10th house, and especially really close to that midheaven, that energy is going to play itself out in your career. And Neptune is certainly related to acting. And so to me, that makes sense that he pursued an acting career, because that Neptune is very strong there, up conjunct his midheaven. And I wanted to read a little bit about that from a book called The 12 Houses by Howard Sesportus. He talks about 10th house Neptunes may embody various principles, anything from representing what is beautiful, stylish and glamorous, to that of the outcast and public scandal. Clint Eastwood, who personifies the image of the perfect rugged hero, and Bruce Lee, the kung fu master who embodied the graceful victor, were both born with Neptune in Virgo in the 10th. Besides politics and cinema, other Neptunian careers include social work, art, fashion, photography, music, dance, religious work, and healing. Not only is he an actor, but he is an advocate. And there's things you can find out online about him. I believe he has a nonprofit, but I know he does advocate for things. And, you know, that's another reason why he spoke up about this sexual assault issue, because he's comfortable in that role of being an advocate, and especially with that Neptune on the 10th house cusp. What also makes him an advocate is that his sun conjuncts Uranus, and Uranus is the principle of humanity. So there is a part of him that really does feel that, you know, urge to want to cultivate humanity. And I know he was very affected by the Charlottesville riots, or, you know, the clash between the people in the KKK and the anti-protesters that were there, and the damage that was done. He really was saddened by all of that. So he definitely has that humanitarian part of him as well. And finally, so he had transiting Pluto squaring his sun in 2016, and in 2017 it retrograded almost within a degree of his sun. And Pluto transits don't often come around because Pluto moves so slowly. So to have it squaring your sun is unique, and the sun is the principle of the father. So I feel that this transit was indicative of some sort of you know, letting go, some sort of experience of the transformation around father. And I know that the father had a long battle with cancer. I don't know when it started, but perhaps that's what he was dealing with in 2016 and some of 2017 as well. So I think that's going to wrap up my reading on Matt Damon. If you like my channel, please subscribe. Also, I do chart readings. You can reach me at lindsayc73@gmail.com. And I want to thank you so much for watching, and look forward to doing another reading for you all. Take care. Adios.